Dark goblins, elves, humans, and the undead plague this world. There are tens of thousands of them spread across some 205 settlements, and I want to see if I can raise every last one in just 10 years, starting from a fresh settlement in these savage wilds. Zahn founds this venture and breaks ground to start Brassstrangers' journey. But though this city is named after brass, the dwarves find iron-rich lemonite as they dig down into the ground. A long tunnel leads to an initial central shaft, from which all economic activity, like this woodworking area, is going to be based. Stoneworking in a nearby hub isn't even ready before the first combat comes to their door. It's admittedly not a goblin army, but a woodcutter standing right beneath the tree they fell to gain a casus belli against all elf kind. Stoneworkers prepare to make doors and furniture for bedrooms that are dug out one level up from the entrance. These are overly simple for now, but that will change once the war machine is up and running, processing the plentiful iron around here. A planter prepares farms near the surface. Do these each need to be these neat 2x3 chunks with walkways between them? Absolutely not. Are aesthetics way too important to dwarves even during challenges like this? Ask their amphitheater, which will serve as the tavern and dining area once fully furnished. But though the basic foundations of any dwarven settlement are being somewhat rushed through, that still isn't fast enough for Mestos and English. It's a fittingly militaristic first impression for new migrants, as is the battle that ensues moments later when the dwarves are attacked by agitated owl people angry about the local deforested area. Fortunately, the early military is ready to rebuff them without loss, and seeing such an impressive sight convinces some of the migrants to join the militia. It quickly swells to 5 dwarves, but especially given their lacking equipment, there's still lots of room for improvement before they're ready to take on empires with thousands of people. Ambitious dreams fuel hard work, and they'll be marching to war before too long. Hungry mouths will be fed in a food prep area above the tavern, and the injured from both the owl people and all future battles will be treated in a hospital carved into the sand even further up. But finally, he said like 2.5 minutes into the video, it's time to start the metalworking quarter, where all of the armor and weapons that will be made into the very picture of fear to every non-dwarf out there will be produced. The homeland's diplomats arrive just in time to watch the dwarves install the first metal smelter, which will turn iron ore they've found everywhere into workable bars just half a year after settling here. The diplomat also gets to watch a giant honey badger get dispatched by the militia captain Mestos if she wasn't literally sleeping on the job. Definitely just all of that extra training that she's been volunteering for. An ash furnace near the carpenters turned one log into charcoal, which is burned with the plentiful coal around this place to fuel all future smelting and forging. With that done, the mayor Zahn takes his place in an overly spacious and underdecorated office, then prepares the first work order for Rigoth, the hopefully legendary blacksmith-to-be. The dwarves finally carve out space for temples near the amphitheater, where they'll worship gods who are mostly more benign than them. They finally start making as much food and booze as they go through, but it'll be a while until they're actually stocking up a surplus. Instead, Brassstrangers is blessed amongst dwarven kind for other reasons. Their veins of coal and iron are so massive that they need to build tunnels to the far end of their U-bends just to better excavate these plentiful deposits. It's little wonder that this was the site chosen to start all of this bloodshed. The smelters and forges are soon always busy, and it isn't long until the armor situation is already looking much better. Their iron suits have everything but high boots and gauntlets, though that extravagance stands in stark contrast to the simplicity of cultural spots like an altar. Though with such an ambitious goal fueling both forges and dwarven willpower, weapons and not altars are made. But the dwarves dream not of nicer accommodations as the first year comes to its end, but of steel weapons and gear. Only having a few soldiers makes full-scale war impossible for now. But the dwarves have been good. There's a little goblin hamlet to the west that they can raid, as a treat. And so, the militia, headed by Mestos, heads out to break history and start a cascade of blood-soaked dominoes exactly 1 year after first arriving here. It only takes them a few days to return with mixed news. The orange lines are injuries or losses, yellow is neutral. The cyan that isn't there till near the end mark good kills. The soldiers only rampaged through the streets and didn't fully raise the site, which means there's still something there that they'll have to go back for. But since iron didn't seem to do a good enough job, miners descend down into the ground to try and find fluxstone so that forges can start making steel. In doing so, they find a cavern, but they also find dolomite, which will help at the forges. Iron, fuel, and flux makes pig iron. Iron, pig iron, flux, and fuel makes steel. Every bar is expensive, sure, but dwarven steel is nearly the strongest material in the world, and these dwarves are on the path to have it so incredibly early. Even hearing that Rigoth is preparing to make this into armor is apparently enough to make some of the soldiers shed their iron gear in eager anticipation. They quickly breach another cavern while mining out more fluxstone, but while the lower cavern will stay closed, this upper one is going to be left open. That invites threats, sure, but it also lets them grow more food in the fertile soil than in the near barren sand above, and it also lets them harvest silk that the plentiful little spiders leave to eventually make clothes processed at a clothing area near the caverns. The caverns also provide the opportunity for the kind of sprawling, randomly placed, and irregular rooms that any real dwarf loves. Neither better rooms nor the promise of conquest and glory draw migrants though. These are influenced by fortress wealth when the last year's traders left, and with so much of their focus being on making steel gear, the dwarves didn't have riches to draw more migrants. They'll have to wait until the next traders see the wonderful and expensive steel gear and ample silken stocks just waiting for a tailor. In a different kind of act of violence, animals are slaughtered for hides, fur, fat, meat, and bones to help the fledgling economy, while the military starts getting used to the weight and heft of the first steel gear. That will help as they prepare for soon-to-be resumed raids to start picking off smaller settlements. The forge also turns other plentiful meals like silver into statues to make this war machine just a little bit more pleasant. That should also impress merchants who arrive at a fortress valued at 14,000 dwarf bucks. Zahn asks them to bring instruments next year, which will hopefully make this place just a little more lively. And just to show them that they're serious about making outsiders less lively, the military makes a show of marching off to attack the nearby goblin hamlet they'd already raided. But even though they loot it and rampage between both buildings in the tiny place, they don't manage to fully destroy it, which seems like it'll take more troops. They try and prove that wrong a few more times, but the seemingly empty hamlet remains. Perhaps that's a sign to take a break from raising for now, and let soldiers that have been abroad for so long work in the fortress. They add a lot of labor that the fortress had been falling behind on without their help. The upside is that hearing about steel gear being insufficient motivates Rigoth to make their first masterwork steel piece. The fortress adds a library to store scrolls and tomes they legally acquire on their trips outside, and the planters also start working the caverns to prepare to feed a growing population, while other dwarves make more smelters and a jewel recorder to build wealth and attract more residents. There's a fine balance between military experience and the larger military that will come with having a wealthier fortress attracting more soldiers. But with the second year almost gone and 0 of 205 targets raised, that's more than enough peace for now. The military set their sights on a different settlement and kill everyone they find once more, but again fail to raise it. At least the soldiers gain more experience with every fight, and it's far better practice than mere training. Steadier hands swing weapons better, and the third settlement is finally dropped for good. The fourth follows suit and is razed to the ground. These were both little 10-person goblin villages, but the military is finally getting the hang of genocide. This thick winter is no season for adventuring though, so the soldiers take a break from trekking across the world as the year finishes passing. This next set of raids will feature full sets of steel gear, a massive accomplishment for the fledgling fortress of Brassstrangers. Of course, the army needs better accommodations, which means a barracks near the front of the base so that they're ready to handle goblin attacks, fit with furniture to hold the gear, and plenty of space to train between raids. That's prepared while metal is made into more masterwork steel gear and exquisite platinum crafts. An elven caravan arrives, perhaps not realizing that no amount of trade will save them in the end. But despite that resolution, Zon still gets sweet-talked into buying some snakes. It isn't long before the forges start to cool, and soldiers start moving over to full steel armor. Oh, how beautiful they look in the entrance. The sharp clack of boots on stone, the beautiful gleam of light off shining steel. Sure, there's only 7 of them for now, but their numbers will swell in time, and all will learn to fear this intimidating sight. Surely now they can handle a small goblin hamlet full of rotting corpses. No, of course not. They come back with more loot, but the place isn't gone. Really, the steel gear needs a proper test that will come in the form of whatever humans are guarding a small, independent settlement to the far southeast. But given their habit of rampaging through and not actually getting rid of settlements, the third year starts with defenses being dug out around the base's entrance to prepare for a firing line of ballistas. Perhaps it's that promise of safety even when the military is gone, instead of the promises of conquest offered by departed traders' tales of steel. But migrants finally arrive again after a full year of refusing to come. The huge swell in wealth brings lots of hopeful hearts, and the population more than doubles. Mestas' squad is filled out with a full regiment of 10 dwarves. Then Minkat is promoted to captain and gets most of a second squad to start training. It's enough to make someone that fancies themselves a hunter confident enough that they set out to try and prove it. But given the number of savage and giant creatures about these lands, that's quickly stopped so the military can focus on war and not saving Private Assen. But though the 30 incoming dwarves had some 10 amongst them with combat experience, who fit right in alongside the rest of the military, there are no metal crafters to bolster the fortress's wealth with excellent platinum crafts. There are no tailors to work silk into exquisite garments. This dearth of artisans doesn't stop the 2 dwarves in the farming guild from realizing their importance in providing everyone with meals and alcoholic succor. Their farming guild goes in near the caverns they now work, but before it's more than a few simple tables in a big room, the rest of the dwarves get more bedrooms to rest their weary bodies in, and more war to feed their patriotic thirst for conquest. It ends in disappointment yet again as this apparently unkillable infestation refuses to be exterminated. This challenge of theirs might be harder than expected because they can't find the last goblin hiding out on the roof, and not because the goblin armies themselves are too strong. But finally, after the 6th attack on the smallest little goblin hamlet, they manage to kill the last goblin hiding there and burn the place down. Everyone loves a happy ending. Though this story is far from its end. The other plucky settlements that resisted their first attacks will meet a similar fate. Tales of material wealth draw human traders, from whom Zahn will actually ask for some human weapons that the migrant dwarves are skilled in but that Rigoth can't, or won't, make. They're a proud dwarf, and not some surface dweller. Though perhaps living on the surface might be better than in some of these rooms, this addiction to nestling them against cavern walls should know some limits it clearly does not. Mestos brings back tales of destroyed cities, while Minkot trains their troops up and waits for a few more soldiers and for more steel gear to make sure that their adventures are safe. Though that might have to wait just a little while longer. The once plentiful coal has finally run out from these presumably extremely smoky tunnels, which means that it's time to dig down into the depths to replace that now missing fuel. Even without that, a child starts to craft the first artifact, but instead of making a fitting weapon of war, they make a rock salt amulet that's almost as salty as their parents are for having raised a child who isn't patriotic enough to contribute to the war effort. Hopefully, their current lack of work on steel gear doesn't put off the liaison and traders who are here to see progress. At least Zahn can confirm that they've now burned down a few settlements shortly before miners bring back news that they've started to reach magma. They'll begin carefully excavating it by digging up level by level until they stop hitting lava-warm stone, then digging down into the next layer to safely expose the glowing red fires that will fuel all metalworking soon enough. Another 15 migrants arrive while miners keep working. Plenty are fine soldiers, and Mebzuth is quickly promoted to captain a third squad as the army swells up to some 30. That joyous news might have been too much for Zahn, who forgot to buy those instruments they specifically asked for last year and didn't think to ask for this year, because why would they need to ask for something they were just going to buy anyways? Thankfully, magma melts away all regrets. The sweltering heat they feel has to come from lava directly beneath the floor, so after clearing it out and rewarding a child who made an artifact toy axe, the miners finally unveil magma proper. This space is perfect for clearing out a large area that'll serve as the new metalworking district. It won't need much fuel, and that means that it's perfect for making as much steel as the plentiful iron reserves allow. Steel armor the military already boasts attests to how well these first smelters treated Brassstrangers, but all metalworking duties are slowly transferred deep into the ground. Bedrooms and other facilities likewise start making that same trip so that everyone can live like a proper dwarf. And, of course, that includes preparing for full-scale war. The last of the small entry-level settlements fall to the army as the third year nears its end. It's time to ramp things up, and while that will involve killing humans, it's still surprising to see them drowning themselves near the entrance. Oh. One of the nearby goblin settlements that was raised was just reclaimed by a 2,000-strong group. That's going to be a problem. 2 of the 3 squads start venturing out at a time to speed up how quickly settlements fall before them, and though they still don't always raise them, it is still good experience for soldiers who are becoming proficient killers. While more raids go out, miners finish work in the metalworking district and flood the tunnels with magma. That lets Rigoth happily resume steel armor production and even ramp it up. Since that armor will be venturing out with proud dwarven soldiers, the civilians work on man defenses at home by installing fortifications that arrows can pierce through at the back of the entrance to prepare for future ballistas. The elven caravan brings a giant camel, and frankly, how the hell does this fit? When Zahn was mining this out, did they just get huge step ladders and carve out 15-foot tall tunnels just on the off chance that elven caravans came with giant pack animals? The children start getting jealous over all the animals that the goblins get to play with. And so, when the next raids go out and start targeting slightly larger towns of 50 goblins, the dwarven soldiers bring back beak dogs so that the kids have animals of their own. These are hideous little creatures that unfortunately won't be alive too long around here. But at least their meat, hides, and fat to help the fortress grow. But stealing their puppies and destroying these larger settlements will doubtlessly draw attacks, so the dwarves prepare a siege workshop near the carpentry quarter to make ballista parts and arrows. The primary squads continue to head out on larger and larger raids, but instead of goblin reprisals, a forgotten beast is the first to try and exploit some of the military's absence. The most valuable soldiers, who definitely aren't just backups, enter the depths. The beast opens the door like a gentleman, then throws itself at the army, who handle it with surprising ease. Despite their inexperience, they dip, dodge, and block, though it did admittedly poison a child before the soldiers killed it. That just means the military needs to grow even more. Fortunately, more migrants arrive, and morale among the victorious squadron is high enough to draw recruits eager to train. Unfortunately, attacks against goblins have drawn the ire of the larger empires they were allied with. Some 8,000 of the creatures have turned their attention on Brassstrangers and declared war against all dwarven kind. That's going to be a problem, though once they fall, subjugating the rest of the world should be much easier. At least there'll be no shortage of meat to fuel the soldiers, since every conquest nets a dozen beak dogs to butcher. But though Brassstrangers is doing well subjugating their local little towns, the rest of the dwarves fare poorly in the war. 2 dwarves here assume new titles after their hometowns are burned down. And then the first goblin force to ever show up at Brassstrangers' door does so to try and finish the job. Fortunately, this is but a scouting party of brave but foolish brutes that are easy to push off in a messy affair. The soldiers even throw beak dog soap everywhere just to taunt the dying goblins. And so, war rages on. Dwarven soldiers trample yet another goblin settlement. Goblin soldiers return the favor at a dwarven city. Another dead baron leaves their position to someone in Brassstrangers, bringing the fledgling fortress up to 3 VIPs. It's a good thing that ballistas are about ready. Human traders only reconfirm what everyone already knows. This world is at war, and no place on this continent is safe. Oh, imagine being a warmonger. How despicable. But the resettlement comes faster and faster. Sometimes soldiers bring back tales of having raised a settlement, just for scouts to report that the goblins have resettled it before the soldiers even got back. Raids have to go out more and more frequently to kill the goblins faster than they can migrate. That news is enough to make a militia captain so depressed that they go from being happy about their friends to accepting death in an easily won fight to being a little annoyed that they got rained on. Desperation drives an attack on a fortress guarding the local area, but the underprepared forces aren't ready and suffer the first real losses of their campaign. The goal of raising the world in 10 years has never seemed further, and that only gets worse as the war continues to worsen. Maffel has become the monarch of the last remaining dwarven civilization. Sorry, became. It happened some time ago, because even though there's a pop-up for barons, there's apparently not one for kings. A scout finally brings a report from the besieged capital, and while it did survive, their warrior king did not. Remnants from that attack assail Brassstrangers to finish the job, though they're pushed back once again. Diplomats bring more news about the terrible tides of war, but all the royals seem to want is suitably extravagant accommodations. They seem to prefer ignoring the nearby goblin encampment with 3 times as many goblins as there are dwarves in the entire world. The only twisted upside is that war refugees migrate to Brassstrangers, and they're both eager to get revenge and often well suited for it. The population swells to over 100 for the first time. Most are just peasants or laborers, but they're brave and willing to learn, and so they all start training under an experienced hand's watchful eye. They learn quickly, After all, wielding steel is in a dwarf's blood. They're more than able to help when the next attack arrives at their door, and when the fight heads back to the goblin villages they came from. The squads kill and loot towns on the outskirts only slightly faster than the larger settlements inside can resettle them. But even though it's slow, that's the first time they've made progress against this ever-encroaching threat. In more noble pursuits, the king's in a strange mood and prepares to make what's surely a unique and masterful artifact as their royal rooms are prepared. It's just some boring shell earring. At least the newbie squads are already gaining enough experience that they can kill forgotten beasts with but a single loss. They even join the other squads on a big mission to the fortress that handed the dwarves their first real defeat. And while it does take the military a worryingly long time to return, they bring back tales of lots of kills as they rampage through the place. But though that drives a recruit to make an artifact, they still just make furniture and jewelry instead of weapons of war. No one seems to want to encroach on Rigoth's territory. At least with some of these boring artifacts displayed in rooms full of platinum furniture, the king is finally satisfied with his royal throne. The rest of the fortress continues to do well despite the focus on the military. Kib went from never having touched a needle to being a legendary weaver thanks to the stockpiled silk. 11 furnaces roar and spew noxious smells that dwarves somehow love full time, and even a protracted siege would find that they had to outlast deep stocks. Their numerous defeats even draw goblins that are so desperate that they seek to parley. Mestos speaks for the rest of the military when she laughs them off, and while it does draw the biggest force yet of some 3 dozen goblins and just as many beak dogs, the huge attack only inflicts a few casualties amongst the newer recruits before the goblins are killed to the last. The injured can be treated at the hospital even though it's somewhat overgrown thanks to fungal spores drifting from the caverns. It doesn't look nearly as nice as the king's quarters, which is actually almost as cluttered thanks to the massive art he wants to look at while eating. The other royals' quarters are only slowly built out to placate their incessant whining, while builders focus on the far more deserving crafts guild and temples to the gods that help more than just a few angsty baronesses. But as the halfway point of the venture nears and only little progress has been made, it's time to pursue even greater treasures which will help in this war. That starts with a path from the metalworking and won't involve this poorly timed raid. Hold on, there. Now, suitable attention can be given to the 50 steel-clad dwarves who quickly slaughter the dozen goblins. With them gone, attention goes back to the bridge leading away from the metalworking quarter and towards the unexplored depths. If things go bad here while the squads are out, this bridge will be the fortress's saving grace. And that starts now. 50 proud dwarves leave Brassstrangers for the first time. The faint light trickling in from the entrance gleams off armor that fills the fortress with the sounds of brutes crunching down already well-tread rock. The royals' rooms aren't nearly as nice, though both baronesses get private living spaces now that the king's desires for royal rooms are all taken care of. The 50 dwarves venture out, and progress is still slow. Settlements are razed and reclaimed, and while the goblins' numbers are thinning, the actual number of settlements that are left only slowly falls. Mestos announces a needed change in strategy. Instead of picking off the little cities on the outskirts, they opt to go after larger cities to try and bleed these dry, and stop the resettlement that forces them to wander out time and time again. At least this conquest fills out the library very, very nicely. That ever-growing wealth means that more migrants are always arriving, most of whom are immediately drafted into squads that start to train up. A soldier that headed down to the metalworking area actually managed to track goblin blood there. It's a little gross, sure, but it's also kind of comforting in a very twisted way. This little passage from the smelting area that the miners of slowly worked at, is supposed to head towards some adamantine that they saw when opening up the magma sea. As good as steel is, it still pales in comparison to the stuff of legends, but it's hard to obtain, and this flooded tunnel is only part of the reason. There are pockets of magma and water everywhere that miners have to carefully work around. Some of the more overworked miners question if this is even needed, as skilled dwarven soldiers attack larger settlements with 50 or 75 goblins without even suffering losses. But though goblins can offer little in the way of revenge, the dwarves face divine retribution in the form of a terrifying devil that escapes from the obsidian miners working towards adamantine cleared out. The miner falls in a spew of magma, but a retreating child pulls the lever and seals off the cave, then plays pretend to imagine they didn't just watch someone get boiled alive. This little guy might have just saved the fortress though, and this is cheaper than therapy, so all the power to them. Soldiers might brave that demon when they return, but it threw fire, so maybe that just stays sealed off and miners find adamantine through some other path. A rock salt mechanism? That's not even getting the spiel about being inferior to weapons. Doesn't deserve it. The so-called mechanic that made it might be target practice for an archer squad that starts to train using crossbows and bolts the dead goblins donated. The 5th year nears its end, and while there are more and more victories under their belts, there is still far more to claim. The upside is that everything is speeding up as the dwarves get stronger and more numerous. The elves are a future target for them, and their demand to cut down fewer trees only speeds up their demise. But with war with the goblins already so taxing, it's best to humor these wood elves and agree to only cut down 11 trees. It's not like carpentry is a huge part of the plan, but just to spite the elves, woodcutters go through 8 of that allowance right in front of them. Perhaps it's but a coincidence, or perhaps karma comes quickly. Brassstrangers suffers its first defeat in a long time while raiding at the hands of a brass devil in Torment Stars, a goblin settlement to the west. Demons are already terrifying enough normally, but during raids, they're brutally difficult, since off-screen fights are an endless series of one-on-ones and the squads can't just gang up on the beasts. The squads will go back to finish the job once there's an even more elite squad with even better gear in the form of some adamantine. The miners sensed it was around here, but no one knows exactly where it is, so they'll have some exploring to do. Though before they get too far with it, the miners work on expanding the tombs. It's totally unrelated to the divine retribution that happened last time. Definitely can't happen again. It's not a concern, just like the huge work order of coffins that arrive just as a new migrant wave comes shouldn't concern them. The king, Maffel, thinks that progress towards adamantine is too slow. They want to dig deeper for unearthly treasures, and what could be better than a squad with the strongest armor in the world? They also really want catapult parts. Kinda got a ballista thing going on here, but sure, ruin the aesthetics. After settling in and claiming rooms, migrants are once more added to a new squad to start training up. It's a common tale at this point. 20 arrive, 10 work the fortress, and 10 with less useful skills join the military. The squads head out in groups of 2 or 3 and make quick work of their targets in rapid succession. But it's okay because they read and pursue intellectual activities between bouts of violent genocide. There are tons of successful stories about societies where half of everyone served in the military, right? But despite the king's impatience, progress on adamantine is slow. There are so many pockets of water and magma that force the dwarves to check every last bit of rock as they blindly mine around looking for that beautiful blue. Human caravans can't make that any easier, but they can confirm that the world is still at war when they sell leather and books for some basic copper and silken goods. Beak dogs were giving them plenty, but the war effort requires backpacks and water skins for all of the soldiers, and meat rots faster than butchers can provide leather. A different human merchant group sells an elephant, which could be very useful if the dwarves acquire a breeding pair. War animals are a threat to everyone, including brass devils. Back down below, progress is interrupted by a spontaneous fire, but it's only an omen for something even worse. The mayor Zahn did the mining that actually freed this beast, though he flees and calls the militia to help him. Before he's even close to out, another miner unveils yet another of these fearsome creatures. Remember, Risen, the fortress's glory is worth a little bit of sacrifice. Zahn did manage to juke his pursuer, though some of the other miners aren't quite as lucky, as they're still unwittingly trapped in the depths that the thing rampages through. At least they finish off their last task before they're butchered and the beast heads for the stairs. The military arrives as they emerge from the depths, and though they do make quick work of them, blood from a bunch of civilians and one of the soldiers joins the creature's foul ichor in decorating the thin hallway. This whole venture is going to smell truly disgusting before miners even return, because progress in the depths must continue. It must resume before cleanup is even started. The squads don't yet need adamantine, but how much would it help? How much faster could they go? At least most of the Western Goblin Empire is down now, with only a few smaller settlements and that lone devil left. Digging reveals more demonic fires, but it also reveals strange ancient metal gear worth 40,000? How is Brassstrangers' first legendary weapon a rusted old mace they found, and not something that Rigoth made? They quickly find another treasure too. This isn't an isolated incident. And then, after mining through rocks splattered with the last miner's blood, they finally set their eyes on the sublime blue of adamantine. It shines even in the cave's darkness, made all the more beautiful by the faint red glow of nearby lava. There's a decent amount of this in the local area, though the danger of excavating it is far from gone. To process that adamantine, craft dwarf shops go in near the... Goblins always attack at the worst times. The military quickly rebuffs them without losses before heading out for some raids. Now that they're gone, craft dwarf shops can go in near the metalworking quarter to... More goblins showed up like 4 days later. The last time they asked for this, it was a big force. Thankfully, these foolish goblins are content to wait for an answer at the edge of the local area while squads return from their raids. Once they do, Mestos thanks them for their polite manners and dares them to attack. They do, and they're slaughtered without losses, even though the Marks dwarves try to change that by charging in blindly. Finally, after far too many interruptions, crafters can begin extracting metal strands from the intricate raw adamantine ore. 10 squads worth will need much more though, so miners continue to try and carefully excavate it. And as they do, they find more ancient artifact weapons that are too damaged and rusted to use. But mining around the pockets of water and magma that sometimes greet miners is dangerous work. The water cools the heat, and sometimes magma-filled pockets open up. Some of them even contain temporal distortions until the miners are finished burning up. After the long process of extracting strands, blue spindles are then turned into wafers at the same smelters that made steel bars. With the latest set of steel gear done, completing more than 60 full suits, it's time for Rigoth to set their hands on true dwarven nirvana and forge it into gear for an elite group. It won't be ready for a long time, but that isn't too much of a problem, since the current gear is enough to raise almost every settlement from the former Western Goblin Empire. Only Torment Staves remains, which has that brass devil that slaughtered the last group. That even includes taking out a town of 300 without a single loss. But the war is far from over. The Eastern Goblin Empire is even scarier, with over 8,000 of the disgusting creatures. Fortunately, after they're gone, the rest of the world should be comparatively easy to take out. Zahn and Mestos discuss how close they might be to their 10-year goal, and both agree that it just might be possible. The captain of the guard is rewarded for their good work with their own nice accommodations, even if they do spend most of their time abroad. It'll be a nice nice place to retire to when the world's quiet and peaceful at the end of this decade. Even with adamantine underway and the first pieces done, the king still wants more catapult parts, even though the rest he's ordered just sit unused in the siege workshop. Maybe he doesn't realize that you can't use these when besieging other settlements? Another forgotten beast arrives, but though web shooting ones are normally extremely scary, a few squads ambush it as it enters, and manage to take it out before it glues everyone and their guts to the walls. Steel fueled this victory, and the Metalsmiths Guild, which is basically just Rigoth and Psylob the amateur metal crafter, won a special place they more than deserve. They'll enjoy a huge area located just south of the metalworking quarter. It even has a lovely natural golden pillar running through it, which seems too fitting to get rid of even for symmetry. The newbies that had trained with the old iron armor or the gear from long gone enemies are finally allowed to upgrade to the most recent examples of Rigoth's hard work. 70 dwarves worth of good steel armor is an amazing accomplishment, and they celebrate it by turning their attention on the nearby reclaimed settlement with 2,000 goblins. This isn't only the biggest mobilization that Brassstrangers has ever seen, it's the largest move of the war that consumes most of this continent. There's understandably nervous chatter as they leave, but the king sends them off with well wishes, and Mestos keeps everyone in line. Her rallying speech as she leaves points out that she has never known defeat at goblin hands, and she swears that that won't change anytime soon. The civilians cheer at their backs to carry them from the fortress, and before long, the soldiers return with news that brings even louder cheers. They achieved nothing short of the greatest victory that dwarven kind ever has. Mestos led them wonderfully. Individual squads of 10 soldiers squared off against 100 goblins each and didn't take a loss. Hundreds of enemies died, and the town itself was razed on the first go. The refugees that fled will spread tales of dwarven might throughout the Goblin Empire. Oh, how far they've come in just 5 years since they struggled to raise towns of just 10. The 7th year dawns with Maffel's desire for even more catapult parts somehow. At least there's slow but steady progress on adamantine gear that's only somewhat stymied by the tide of creatures underground. While the military usually meets them and wins without more than a single loss or two, 2 squads discover that this one breathes fire as it chars them in their armor. It only takes moments for the Gecko Demon to kill 20 strong and battle-hardened dwarves. It heads for the rest of the fortress, but the bridge is lifted just in time to stop it from killing more than the 21 it already has. The raw heat it put out with every breath stopped anyone from even getting close enough to attack it. Brassstrangers was always meant to rely on nothing but raw military might, but this thing just butchered 20 dwarves in seconds, and that makes it really easy to reconsider one's priorities. One trap is still close enough to the vision. The mismatch between the bloody tunnels and a metalsmith's guild with gold thrones couldn't be more stark. The rest of the fortress isn't as nice, though that's partially because there's so many beak dogs rummaging about. The dwarves have paid half a dozen visits to a nearby fortress that's supposed to have 100 goblins, but the soldiers that venture there never find anything but dozens of beak dogs every time they go. The demon slaying trap that's really just an elevated platform suspended on a single support one of the nearby levers can collapse is almost ready to take out the fire-breathing demon when a different fire-breathing threat comes from the caverns. The squads that aren't out raiding head down to deal with it, while it torches the crops and anyone caught outside. Fire in the doorway stops them from even trying to go out and help. When it finally heads through the flames to attack, the group of soldiers do absolutely nothing to it. It's apparently unreachable even as it fills the room with scorching blazes and foul smoke. Why did the miners build 20-foot tall tunnels for this thing to fly around in? 20 armor-clad soldiers watch until, finally, one of them decides to just kick it in half, real casual-like. Steel weapons are overrated. Well, thanks to that and absolutely nothing else, miners also need to expand the hospital after finishing the trap meant for that first fire-breathing threat. But any good trap needs bait, and unfortunately for Lorebomb, they are one hell of an ugly baby. There's no way that another fire-breathing threat is here. Oh, thank the gods. This one is in part of the cavern that's closed off, so it can't get in. Back to using a baby as bait. Or not, since Lorebomb is actually a military baby being carried around by an active duty soldier. A random peasant heroically volunteers to stand in their place. Don't worry about that hunger and thirst, they will not be a problem for very long. Some other bit of nameless bait mines out the way in. Oh wait, that's Zon the mayor. He quickly gets drafted into an exclusive squad and told to run the fuck away. The bridge on the left is pulled to make sure that only the volunteer waits for the beast. Then the lever for the support structure is pulled to send the top floor tumbling down. The cacophony and dust it kicks up is spewed throughout the fortress, but the gecko demon meets its end, and whoever that was will be spoken of as a hero for decades to come. With the demon guarding the depths gone, the miners return to harvest more adamantine there, and peasants come to reclaim the steel gear from the squad that died to the gecko. They'll have to clean out the charred flesh from the pieces before the next wave of migrants come and the future recruits are told to put it on. Miners also work on adding another entrance into the caverns in case more fire-breathing threats show up. They aren't going to seal them off completely to prevent a fight, but the soldiers shouldn't be metal-coated meat bags just waiting to be roasted. Goblins show up for a fight while most of the soldiers are out, and while the Marks dwarves are here, they forgot that they're supposed to have bolts or how to get more from the stock of more than 1,000, so they instead rush to put on steel armor and use their experience swinging crossbows like maces to beat the goblins back. More and more of the filthy creatures show up, but these only show after the other squads return, and only serve to add another victory to Brassstrangers' record. Even with 3 archaeology sites worth of bone and discarded equipment to litter the ground, more goblins still come, as do friendly caravans who will see the fortress approach 1,000,000 dwarf bucks worth of value. That's only starting to go up faster and faster as Rigoth makes more adamantine gear to supplement the steel that most of the military uses, as well as Psylob's efforts to turn plentiful rare metals into exquisite crafts. Admittedly, they aren't quite outweighed by the eye-watering smell wafting out of the plentiful pools of vomit, blood, stinking corpses, or rotting miasma that are everywhere. No wonder most of the fortress is less and less happy as time ticks by. But the first adamantine order of mail shirts is almost done, and it's not like the soldiers can sit idly by cleaning up when there are necromancer towers to the north. Aren't bedrooms covered in vomit worth the safety that comes from cleaning up such places? The king says no, as he slips into a depressed state. Maffel misses both the thrill of battle and the comfort of familiar faces. He decides to sit in his room and eat food while not really caring about anything in the world anymore. That's not quite ideal for a king. After the squads come back victorious yet again, his wife, who had served in the most elite squad, is relieved of duty. Hopefully her presence is some kind of comfort for him. Children join the king in slipping into a depressed state, which doesn't really make sense because they have literally hundreds of puppies to play with in between bouts of hauling corpses and bits of teeth. That is not an adamantine helmet, but it is close to armor. The gem-encrusted adamantine artifact is worth over 140,000 on its own. That immediately goes into the king's hands, and if a fashionable hat doesn't snap him out of his depression, then surely a misgenerator will. There's not much room as is, so for it to go near the stairs, it'll take a lot of finagling and rebuilding. That includes briefly opening up the forgotten beast-infected cavern and walling it off just a little bit deeper. It's a good thing migrants are always arriving. The most recent group is led by an experienced hand as they start to train underground. They'll be the first responders to hopefully handle any more demons deep within the rocks. Or they'll die horribly as the next demon comes out of the walls and slaughters them. On second thought, having newbies fight demons with only a few demonstrations on which side of the sword to hold might not have been the best idea. It doesn't help that 2 of the soldiers even went to the wrong side of the walls, though frankly, they're probably the smart ones. Fortunately, the teacher arrives to fix things after returning from a brief break. Throughout all of this, the dwarves have constantly been raiding the empire to the northeast. They take down towns of 75 or 100 to slowly bleed out the 5,000 goblin fortress as they resettle it. Though with only rough estimates available from scouts, it's hard to know how much progress is actually being made. Back home, Rigoth has worked over 100 adamantine bars into gear, and the fort's wealth approaches 1.5 million. So the migrants in the coming season should buoy the population and make conquest even more fearsome. Unfortunately, the other goblins start to realize what's going on and join the war. Everyone but the small goblin empire in the south and the elves to the east are in a huge world-spanning conflict at this point, and Brassstrangers is the linchpin of the non-goblin alliance located in the center of the world. Well, that can't be good. Everyone just randomly elected a new mayor after almost 7 years of Zahn's impeccable rule. Coincidentally, at the same time that a huge lava spill hit the caverns where miners like Zahn worked. A week later, people finally noticed that the former mayor, is missing when he doesn't show up to congratulate the military on another successful defense of the fort. Deagle the mayor and Dumont the manager take over for his responsibilities and claim his accommodations. Zahn might be resting in peace, but falling to the lava in desperate search of more adamantine to hopefully win the war he started seems like a fitting end for the man. It's probably a bad thing that the entrance to the fort is more than 50% vomit, while blood is almost as common as clean space in the remaining area. The dwarves might just be throwing up because the elves are back to demand that the dwarves limit themselves to a handful of trees, though they are going to once again accept it so that they can focus on raiding goblins and not watching the leaves. The front of the fortress might need a pressure washer to clean, but instead an inlet for a mist generator will have to do. And so time passes quickly. Raids go out to keep bleeding the larger fortresses, adamantine progress continues, the elf merchant decides to leave through the yet unused cistern, and someone finally installs the grate to drain the mist generator. A miner opens up the river and lets water flow in. It's first directed at a well to service the hospital, where it quickly overflows because water pressure is a thing in this game. After closing it off, letting the water flood the entire hospital, and installing another floodgate that stops the pressure from ruining everything, water is turned back on. It sloshes above everyone's heads as it heads for the mist generator, which is one long vertical empty shaft through the bulk of the fortress. As it falls down to the base of the cistern that elven traders thought was an amazing exit, it missed all throughout the staircases on the main levels of the fortress before crashing into the base. Dwarves love these things, and they gain happy thoughts as they travel through the fortress after being misted by it, which should help fix their bad spirits. Raising the 3rd largest goblin fort in the world might also lift their spirits. It has 750 of the brutes against the 100 dwarves that Brassstrangers can mobilize. Very, very, very slowly. The mist generator might help keep people happy, but it's also eating a lot of frames. Or maybe the world is chugging because the drain isn't working and water's falling twice as far as it should. Someone forgot to put a floor in where it's needed, and the raid is delayed until that's fixed, since pathfinding for 100 dwarves really hates all that water flooding everywhere. Fortunately, it's a quick fix that's not actually fixing it. Turn the water back off. Dwarves dwarves drown in the tunnels as everything through the fortress floods. A few more get caught in the torrential downpour and are pushed into the cistern, where the waterfall beats them down and drowns them before the water even starts to evaporate. The disastrous mist generator is staying off. This, admittedly, was not a good execution of the idea. It wasn't even a neutral execution of the idea. Blame architects that have only ever prioritized war engineering and not civic works. At least time's once again stable enough for the raid to go back out against the massive fortress, while everyone else continues trying to gather adamantine. The local vein is starting to look tapped out, so miners explore the rest of the area for glimpses of the blue above the magma sea. Unfortunately, they find nothing, but the raiding crew brings back even worse news. Mestos's tactics started off well enough, but as the dwarves got tired and the defeated foes in front of them were replaced by fresh enemies time and time again, they started to falter. In the end, the dwarves lost the battle of attrition, and while the army killed some 150, it took almost 20 dwarven lives that have to be refilled. The silver lining is that the less experienced newbies were amongst the dead, so the more experienced soldiers are largely still alive. That's becoming such a common trend though, that the less critical dwarves from the fortress have been picked clean, filling out groups that have died to raids and to demons from the depths. Recruitment staggers until the haggard and angry king demands to be put into the first squad. His wife cautions him and tries to get him to abandon the idea, but he refuses to budge, and neither logic nor emotion sway him from this path. The look in his eyes says it all, and she can do naught but petition Mestos to allow her to dust off her old armor and return to the squad in hopes of keeping him safe. This has always been where the adamantine gear was going to go, and so they're finally told to equip it. It frees up steel for some of the other recruits, though even with that, it isn't quite enough, and other dwarves are starting to lack some gear, as steel-clad soldiers lost abroad can't have their stuff recovered. But just putting on the gear is not enough for Maphos. To the west lies a brass devil, and the gaunt king wants either a glorious victory or a glorious end. But the devil lives up to its name and grants him neither. The king is struck down just like any peasant before him. Worse, the devil remains unharmed. It just refuses to die. No one has ever seen anything like it, and no one knows what to do. But that's not even the only threat left. There's the seemingly unrazeable fortress to the east that purportedly boasts 100 goblins but never has anything. There's the remaining Empire's fortresses to the northeast that boast 6,000 goblins between them, all as time ticks by, and there's only a quarter of the decade they have left. It's a sign of the struggles and multitude of deaths that the departed squads leave just some 50 people behind to handle the fortress. Migrants do arrive, yes, but it's despite the danger, and there are never as many as the war machine calls for. Waves arrive as more tombs are designated. The coffins that fill them are still worked on near the entrance. What a great time for the new queen to take her throne and get the royal accommodations that come with it. If this all fails, it's on Onal. Her first request is a brass dance floor in the expanded tavern, and while that will look good, it's a strange desire when limited hands ensure that important work like hauling off rotting corpses isn't always done on time. But the tavern now needs some performers, and it appears that the queen is a legendary musician, and Rigoth the legendary smith is a great orator. I always love discovering what familiar names have these hidden talents. Back below, the hunt for adamantine draws miners to these deeper depths. They unleash more monstrosities as they do. The army arrives, but the beasts buried deeper continually grow stronger, or the army just gets weaker. This one notches a few kills, as always, against these inexperienced recruits. It wasn't even a soldier that killed it. Some miner with a pick did a better job than 5 steel-clad soldiers before them. Goblins attack, and the army that goes out to greet it isn't even staffed by fully equipped soldiers anymore. Dwarves win the day, but more than a dozen died at goblin hands for the first time in a while here. It's too many for individual funerals, and all of the departed soldiers are buried after a solemn affair that's a huge wake-up call. Onal's first real task as queen is consolidating and reforming the military. The 10.5 sparsely populated squads are condensed down into just 6 fully equipped ones. It's both all the dwarves the fortress can spare, and all of the bodies that the remaining steel gear can equip. Everyone is half-experienced soldiers who are quite literally masters or experts at their crafts, and half less experienced novices or barely competent soldiers that finish filling the squads out and will provide manpower during raises. Also, there's no Marks dwarves anymore. They never work. With that, the raiding has to resume. There are just 2 years left and so much ground to cover that it might already be too late. While they're out, more tombs are dug to prepare for the inevitable losses that will come with these fights. Gone are the times when dwarves prepared intricately designed sections for these. These are little more than mass graves, but it's all the civilians can afford the time for. At least Rigoth will be happy in the mostly re-prepared metalworking area. There are plenty of steel and adamantine bars to shape. Another forgotten beast shows up. Fortunately, soldiers arrive in time and put the beast down without any losses. It's the first threat that hasn't killed anything in a while, so it's safe to say that Onal's redistribution of the military is flawless, and nothing can ever go wrong with it. There's actually another legendary armorsmith here that migrated, though the second forge still belongs to the nearly legendary metalcrafter Onal. Not the Queen Onal, a different one. Oh, said armorsmith went to grab adamantine, but a pocket of magma a miner unleashed burned them to death. One has to wonder how Olan the Baroness could ever be stressed in such a peerless fortress. She's only surrounded by lava and besieged by goblins while all the military squads are gone. Fortunately, Solon the soldier is running a little late to their raid, and the war elephant out front that never found a breeding mate slowly trundles after the goblins and delays their attack while not really taking any injuries. Solon would have ignored the goblins, but they foolishly attack the soldier and drag them into it. The advanced squad is taken out, and Solon is attacked by the remainders that really did not learn their lesson. A different squad returns in time to just barely help the day's hero out with the last few of them. The last goblin raid was outnumbered but still killed dozens. This one outnumbered Solon 12-1 and still lost. That's the power of actually making sure dwarves are fully equipped. But with fewer soldiers and bigger targets, raids take a month each and don't always fully raise the settlement. With how long each siege takes, there would barely be time to finish off the northeastern Goblin Empire, even if the soldiers miraculously won every fight and raised every settlement on their first attempt. That includes the massive 5,000 Goblin Fortress, which is not happening anytime soon. All of that is assuming that the problems from the depths don't rise up and kill any more soldiers too. The more experienced squads handle them far better, but it still involves leaving a squad behind at all times, which further slows down progress abroad. Of course, it isn't always so easy. Another horrendous creature comes from the depths, but this one machine guns off webs that stop soldiers in their tracks. Skittering spider legs slam down on immobilized heads again and again and again. The entire squad dies in moments while only getting a few hits in, and though they took out enough legs that it can't stand properly, the monster still has enough to drag itself about and continue its rampage. The bridges are lifted to seal the caverns off, though in retrospect, this trap should have been rebuilt. There's no way the rest of the military is doing anything to a beast that's already killed 26, including 5 great soldiers. It's safe to say that there will be no more raw adamantine coming up from these depths. That somehow doesn't stop someone from wanting to study. Maybe Hustra wants to understand what went wrong. It'll be a story of greed and unchecked ambition stemming potentially successful ventures. It's the kind of tale worth telling in a YouTube video that'll leave every last person who hears it desperate to click that like button. But there are still some moral victories to achieve before the decade passes. The seemingly unrazable fortress to the east has to be beaten this time. Surely no one escapes from Dwarven Eyes 13 times in a row. With the entire army gone, the invading goblins feel so bad that their forces just aren't there. But even then, the military only finds one of the 100 inhabitants and again fails to raise the place. If only they took the late Maffle's catapults with the raid. That's fine. In fact, that's even better. The larger moral victory always lay to the west. The brass devil of Torment Staves is still there. The soldiers are so much better than when they attacked it a few years ago, and some even have adamantine gear. While they're gone, someone makes an artifact with leather from a forgotten beast, which might be the most badass thing in a fortress with thousands of kills. Unfortunately, the devil is even more of a badass. No amount of elite soldiers or good gear are enough, and it scores kill after kill after kill, all without even seeming to suffer an injury against the best dwarven kind has to offer in this world. Well, actually, the best soldiers didn't really get a chance to fight. It's fighting single file against individual dwarves and picking off the weak, because that's how fights off-screen are battled. One more attempt. That's what Dwarven kind needs. The 3 strongest soldiers get together. Mestos, Asin, and Cadol are all legendary fighters. Mestos is rightly named the crystalline danger of virgins. She's a legendary soldier, tactician, and leader who helped found Brassstrangers, has led the military since its inception, and has over 30 kills under her belt. Cadol of the Green Armors has just as many kills, and Asin Violence Ire the Veiled Channels has even more. They have the best gear Dwarven kind has ever made, including adamantine weapons and armor. They will come back victorious. While they travel, a brawl breaks out as half a dozen fight in the hospital. The Baroness literally kicks a child's ass. But instead of focusing on that, as things come to a close, enjoy a tour of the occasionally chaotic fortress. From top to bottom, there's an overused hospital, a few layers of underused area marked by long, mined-out veins that were once iron or coal, the original metalworking area and temples, a food and beverage area, storage, the library, and the dining hall/tavern, the initial bedrooms and mayor's area, the entrance with stone and woodworking quarters near them, plus the overused barracks and trading depot, bedrooms nestled up against caverns for a few stories, some other economic buildings, guild halls, unused defenses, and a lot of area dug out for dolomite. There's the royal areas and clothing district, more bedrooms, the cistern that was part of the total disaster that was the mist generator, tombs, the entrance to the adamantine area that filled so many tombs, still ruled by the beast that did a good chunk of that, the intricate tombs that are more decorated, and finally the metalworking area and guild hall. It's one hell of a fortress that's housed over 300 different dwarves through its time, but now the surviving fraction of that wait for news of a glorious victory that never comes. There's no news because there are no survivors to bring back the tale. 3 legendary soldiers with the best gear in the world all lost their lives in the fight without ever seeming to inflict any damage back. That is, perhaps, the most suitable ending to Brassstrangers. Dwarven might trying to rise against the threats throughout the world and ultimately failing. I think it might be possible with better organization and some better luck. If I were doing this again, or if you want to give it a try, I'd focus more on having a large population, especially early on. I lost way too many people pushing for adamantine because I insisted on doing it with manpower when I should have relied on traps to get rid of those demons. 2 of them killed nearly 50 dwarves between them, including good soldiers. I started raiding with too many people too early, when I should have prioritized growing the economy to get more migrants and make a larger military in the mid to late game. I should have pissed off the goblins so that they sent raids to train a squad or 2 of good soldiers in the early game, just so there were experienced soldiers to teach newbies before finally starting to raid in mass. I also should have tried to find war animals. When the first few merchants failed to bring some, I should have begun raiding the elves to try and take some back. If I did all of that, I might have been able to raise an army strong enough to both kill much more quickly and not lose people, which would have added to the number of skilled soldiers in the late game and could have snowballed. Given enough good soldiers to throw at bigger threats with war animals at their sides, or fewer big threats from a more peaceful world, I think it might just be possible with better macro. But I didn't have that this time. This video has been my biggest undertaking, but I loved the rises and falls of Brassstrangers, and I hope you did too. If so, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss my upcoming content. I'm going to be covering some of the most promising upcoming city builders and colony sims during Steam's Next Fest and making more videos going forward. Got any ideas for challenges or comments on other things I could have done better this run? Let me know down below.